4 college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. It's our new intro. We're just testing out. Hopefully it's good. I'm your host, Jen Subtraction Bankard, and I'm here with some emperors of Rome. First, he's not quite sure why he can't stop time, and neither are we. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
Just imagine Donald Trump directing this film. It'll never go anywhere. He cannot do anything. He cannot hold anything together. He couldn't do anything that has a structure. I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
I'm doing great, having flashbacks to the Q&A. Not this film, but the Q&A of this film now. And he's not quite sure whether he will inherit his father's bank. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
If it's a boy, we'll name him Francis. I'm good, Jen, and I wanted to use the line that got the biggest laugh in my theater, and I will enjoy hearing about your theater as time goes on.
I think we experienced something similar. And last but not least, he wants to remind you about the practicalities of governance. It's Antonio Elefano. How are you holding up, Antonio?
Can't you see I've lost to you? I love you, Caesar. I've done what I've done only because I love you and couldn't find any way to win you. I love you as an artist. I worship you as a genius. I want you as a man. I'm doing all right, Jen.
Oh, man. I had totally blocked that out. That made no sense. Okay. Those were all references to the film we are here to review today. This is a big one, folks. Francis Ford Coppola's new and already storied allegorical epic, Megalopolis. So we actually, all 4 of us got to go to, it was an IMAX sponsored an advanced screening as a part of the New York Film Festival. And what PT's bit referred to was there actually was a Q&A before the film. We can talk about it. I was scratching my head with Francis Ford Coppola, the director, Robert De Niro, and Spike Lee. So we'll have a lot to talk about. Normally, we will have a spoiler-free section for about the first 30 minutes or so, but we kind of figured this film was so wild that we're just going to go right into spoiler mode after we give our short take. So it'll be extra short spoiler-free section today. The film's out in theaters this weekend. Go see it if you dare. PT, if listeners think we don't need to build a better podcast after listening to this episode, what can they do?
If they don't want to wait 41 years for us to complete the project, they can tune in wherever they get their podcasts. We host the Long Take Review on Jen's Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. But you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, wherever podcasts are available. You should be able to find us. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review, as well as on Letterboxd. Our account is at LTRpod, or you can search for the hashtag LTRpod to see what each of us has been watching. Jen?
Thanks, PT. So we'll just start with our short takes. What was your general reaction to Megalopolis? If you want to include stuff about the actual theatrical experience and the specific screening that we saw, you're welcome to do that as well, as long as you keep it spoiler free. So we'll start. Where should we start? Start with Greg.
I think long-term listeners or long-time listeners of the podcast know this was my number 1 hype draft pick, and it's certainly one I've been excited to see over the course of the year and referred to a lot. I think it is very safe to say that my flawless record of hype draft picks has been destroyed. This is it's an experience, and it's one that I will not forget for a very long time. I think there's an old adage in show business when, like, if you're in a play, so more in theater, I guess, and like if your family comes and watches it and the first thing they say is, gee, it sure looked like you were having fun up there, it means it really didn't work. And so I will say, gee, it sure looks like a lot of them were having fun up there. And I hope everybody had a good time making this movie together, not talking about politics, apparently, according to the Q&A. So, my final thought on it, in the short take, I have a lot more to say, is just I can't find myself being completely cynical, because I do think hearing Coppola talk about why he made it and what he wanted it to do, there was something very sweet and genuine kind of at the heart of that. But the product is just, I don't understand it. It's rough. It's really bad, and I now understand why nobody wanted to buy it for distribution. But I will throw it over to Antonio and ask Antonio, am I dead wrong? Did you love this film?
Okay. Well, imagine if one of our most celebrated filmmakers wrote a manifesto, and that manifesto was adapted into a movie, and that movie became a dumpster fire. This is this is just like epic awfulness on like every level, starting with like the incomprehensible writing. I pulled that quote. I found like an old version of the screenplay that was online, and so I there were some changes, so there were some things that looked unfamiliar to me, but that I remembered, that exchange. So it might not be exact, but um, the acting that can only be explained by everyone thinking they were in like a jury duty fake movie scenario, but no one knowing who the dupe was. I am the dupe. The ticket buying audience, that's the dupe. Those are my thoughts. PT, what about you?
Wow. Yeah, this isn't good. This was a bad movie. I will echo what Greg is saying. I do appreciate the audacity and the aim of trying to do something that is this epic thing that's like maybe trying, or at least is thinking it's trying to like reconstitute what cinematic storytelling can be, and also trying to make like one last big commentary about art and life and politics and the world, and history and time and all of that. But it just, it doesn't work. And I hate to say that my takeaway is like, everyone always complains, including us, about like the suits and the people who interfere and the folks who question whether something can actually work or not. And a lot of times they're wrong. But for a long time, it's been the Star Wars prequels were the things that were like, this is what happens if you don't have anyone that tells you no. And I can put that aside finally, happily in my life, and say, no, this is the prime example of what happens when there's no one to tell someone no. And it just balloons out of control, and just nothing actually connects and makes sense. And yeah, it's wild. And unfortunately, to the degree that I've heard stories, not even talking about the extras, but about the famous actors who were in the movie, I don't think they had a fun time making it. I think this was an insane thing that they were all like, I hope this works out. And now it didn't. And I think it means something that none of the actors are doing any of the promotion. It's all Francis Ford Coppola, and unrelated to the movie, Robert De Niro and Spike Lee, sitting in for a Q&A. Jen, what did you think?
I can't believe I have to be relatively the good cop here.
Wow.
No, I did not like this movie. Let's be clear about that. So first, I just want to say, we're going to trash this movie probably quite a bit, but we still, utmost respect to Francis Ford Coppola. Again, he self-financed this movie.
Other than his treatment of the extras, let's just put that caveat that there's an active controversy around him. But yes,
I keep conveniently forgetting about that. Yes. So okay, let me rephrase it then. Utmost respect to Francis Ford Coppola's previous works, right? Like, obviously, nothing about what we're about to say about this movie takes away from amazing films like Apocalypse Now, right? That doesn't undermine the work that he did, the achievements from before, right? Maybe his behavior on the set of this movie can, potentially, right? Depending on what actually happens with that. I actually don't know what's happening with that in terms of adjudicating it. Okay. A big thing about this movie is that it is so heavy-handed in its messaging. Antonio used the word manifesto. It is so literal in terms of how it's trying to convey those big ideas that it almost feels like, and again, this is going to be very ungenerous, but it feels like when I read a freshman student paper where they've only just discovered like a major theoretical concept for the first time. There are several moments throughout this whole film where it really feels like Francis Ford Coppola read a Wikipedia page on something and then came back and was like, you know what, everybody? You know what's incredible? And presenting it as if it's very deep and profound, but it's not. That paired with like how the tone of this film is just confounding. Like at no given moment did I know if I was supposed to be laughing or moved, and what's intentionally funny and what's incidentally funny, because our theater was really laughing a lot throughout the whole film. And so how seriously we're supposed to take everything, I assume very seriously. And so laughing is bad, but I don't actually know. It's unclear. So yeah, this was just a very confusing watch. And I do think there are some choices in terms of the formalism that could be interpreted as like bold and forward thinking. But it's a real fine line between that and just like disorganized and unfocused. So that's where I'm at right now.
In the words of Spinal Tap, it's a fine line between clever and stupid.
Yes, that's it's very true. Very true. There's just a lot going on and a lot of confusing things in this movie. And I'm not quite sure where the folks who are saying this is like a masterpiece and genius and so bold and going to revolutionize filmmaking, I don't understand where they're coming from. I would like to understand their perspective better, but I don't.
To that point, I think it's worth mentioning we are recording before the wide release, but I think a lot of the film kind of letterbox crowd got to these IMAX Q&As. I think it was in 60 cities. And I think we are all completely confounded, and I've seen a lot of critics confounded by the fact that it's currently averaging, I think, a 2.8 on Letterboxd, but it is a very flat line all the way across from 0.5 stars all the way to 5 stars. And it like you said, it's kind of confounding. In the Q&A, Coppola said he wanted to create something that is some people's favorite movie and a movie some people hated. So mission accomplished, I guess.
Right.
Like you did what you set out to do, buddy. But sorry, buddy is condescending in a way I should not be condescending. But it is really confounding to see this kind of wide range of opinions. And I hope as it goes wide, we get to hear from the people who really love this, kind of share their thoughts and help show us what we really aren't seeing in it. I think I was 3 stars, and that was the highest among the 4 of us. And I'm just gonna say, look, I get it, but also you guys should watch some of the like straight to Netflix movies that are being created right now. Like,
That's fair.
I think my bottom is lower because I watched Uglies, a Netflix original, last weekend, and other ugly fares.
I watched Rebel Moon Part 2, so I have a floor. This is slightly above that floor.
Okay. So, but for those listening, we are going to, in spoiler mode, attempt to make sense of this, well, what we saw, right, as best we can, and be generous and try to interpret what Francis Ford Coppola was trying to do, right, and what the intention behind it was. Obviously, I was just talking to my students about this today. The artist's intention, if it doesn't resonate with the audience, doesn't mean a whole lot at the end of the day. Not necessarily in terms of criticism, but in terms of reception, like just pure reception and whether or not people like this movie. But yeah, so I'm just putting that out there, that if you have seen this movie already and you are yearning to make sense of it all and you want something to grab onto, we're going to try our best to do that today. It's probably not going to be pretty, but we are going to try. Are we ready to go into spoiler mode? All right, let's do it. So if you have not seen Megalopolis and our reaction to it has not scared you away and you still want to see it and don't want it spoiled, go see it. See it for yourself. You have to see it to believe it, maybe. Come back and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. can we get more specific about why this is bad? Because, and in particular, sort of what we picked up on when Greg was speaking a moment ago of like that fine line, right? Like how can you tell the difference between a movie that doesn't work and something that is groundbreaking and like so experimental that nobody understands it? You know what I mean? Because that is a discourse that is floating around, right? The positive reviews of this are talking about how it's so bold in its vision and really trying to push the form forward, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you tell the difference, I guess, in this case?
With Apocalypse Now as the sort of the positive comparison people are trying to make, which was that movie came out and people were like, nope, this is a bad war movie. In a very similar amount of negativity, or at least for some people, there was vitriol for it. And so they're like, but in a dozen years and forward, people will see it in this. But there also were a lot of people that liked Apocalypse Now, and also Apocalypse Now is good, and this movie isn't. But I spoke over Antonio. So Antonio, what were you going to say?
I'll start on a very simple level. I teach a lot of pre-law students, and I read like their personal statements that they send to law schools, and there are these like 3-page essays about like why they want to go to law school. And one thing that I always tell them, because they want to stuff so much into it, is that a 3-page essay about 5 things is about 0 things, right? Because nothing's developed in a satisfactory or in-depth way. This is a movie that is about like 40 things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like later on, there was a question in our prep here about like what's the thesis of this movie, and I feel like there were like 10 theses that were explicitly stated in the course of the movie, or like 10 monologues about 10 different things. And so part of it was that it was just sort of like dizzying, to just go from one thing to another. I never felt anchored in anything. Um, Sometimes the ideas can feel rough to sort of like figure out in the moment, but then you ground yourself in the story. But there's a lot of story happening here, and not a lot of that really coheres either. I mean, there are love stories, there's a murder mystery, there's a hostile takeover of a bank. It's all ludicrous, and none of it matters. Was sort of like my takeaway from that. So that was it for me, at least part of it. That was the sort of like central thing, was that it kept being slippery with what it was trying to tell me, and then at a certain point I just sort of gave up, and realized that like none of this is sticking with me. What about you all?
I'll pick up that thread and say the other thing I would argue is if you have too strong a theme, the grounding factor needs to be the characters. And there were like moments I remember, but if you asked me to describe any one of these characters deeply, I can't, because they're all like very superficial. And I honestly think it's a script problem, not an actor problem. But then, because we know Adam Driver can be incredible when he's given the right material, and he can transcend even kind of mediocre material. I see you, Star Wars sequel trilogy. But like, he just can't do anything when it's like the thinnest thin line of like, what is his character? A tortured genius, a stand-in for the director, right? And it's so hard to care about literally anybody in this film. And maybe we'll break down favorite characters later, and we can all struggle to see if we remember one name in the mix of these characters. So I want to, so I echo that from Antonio, and then the other response I have to Jen's and PT's kind of corollary about like, well, Apocalypse Now broke the war genre, and if in its difference made us kind of question what is it about war movies that we like, and how does this challenge this in really important ways and kind of change our attitudes towards war. The problem with this is, barring a few visuals that were okay, even on IMAX with great sound, there was nothing innovative here, right? Everything was so heavy-handed in how it took the Roman and the Shakespearean, and literally mind-blowingly has one character saying Shakespeare, like isn't this cool? I'm gonna do To Be or Not to Be in a weird,
and in like the
crazy
first
setting.
15 minutes.
Yeah, and it's like anything that feels so deeply cliched, but is treated reverently like it's innovative, just rings hollow and false and just fell completely flat. This is essentially, a Shakespearean tragedy, but also kind of Romeo and Juliet, but we're not going to commit to anything. And like, how many times have you seen, like, oh, what if, I mean, the central premise, what if America was Rome and we're all just corrupt and things are falling apart? It's like, yeah, that was revelatory in the 80s, maybe when you wrote this script, and now it's called A Tuesday, right? Like it's just not something I've never seen before. And again, I hate to be so cruel, but like, I read student writing that is far more subtle and sophisticated than this level of kind of metaphor. And the other thing, in the pre-show, there's so many slides that were on repeat. It was like 3 slides in repeat, and one of them really said Megalopolis, a fable. And like every time it came up, I felt like everybody in the theater roll their eyes again, because and the title card of the movie, it says Megalopolis, a fable. It's not like the tagline for the poster, it's actually in the movie. So that to me sums up, like, it thinks it's way more clever than it is. But that was rambly. PT, take a crack at it, and then Jen will defend it again.
Well, she did love it. I mean, Antonio and I saw her face when the movie was over. She was so just beaming. She was so happy. Here's the thing that I keep thinking about. In addition, you both said very smart things, better form than I had been thinking about this sort of why does none of this stick? Why does none of it come together? Why does it end up? Because like Antonio's point about the essay trying to do too much stuff, like characters are just like saying like almost taglines to each other, or like just like saying the names of a great artist or a great work of art to be like referencing this and also this. There's one point where like just like 6 Marcus Aurelius quotes are banged out like in a row, and it's set up as if that's like a thing that this family does. But it was also just like, what is going on? Like nothing's actually happening here. And so the thing that is crazy to me is looking at to be a little Francis Ford Coppola for a minute in one way only. I looked at a Wikipedia page, and now I'm an expert. I looked at the Wikipedia production page of this movie, and he took the first 5 months of 1983 to draft this. He offered a part that clearly doesn't exist anymore of a dropout from the West Point Academy to Matt Dillon while they were making Rumblefish later that year. So like this movie's been around forever. The one like the one kernel of an interesting thing related to the movie that was mentioned in that Q&A was these 2001 table reads that happened in Brooklyn, which just had it's like this list here is insane. It's Russell Crowe, Robert De Niro, Leonardo DiCaprio, Giancarlo Esposito, who made it through, Edie Falco and James Gandolfini during the first 2 seasons of The Sopranos, John Hamm, Paul Newman, Al Pacino, Parker Posey, a weird blank void that apparently is in the shape of Kevin Spacey, and Uma Thurman. Like, just wild. While this was happening, that was 23 years ago. And yet, what we have feels like a first draft. It feels like Francis Ford Coppola finished writing it the day before they started filming and did it. Like, no one had time to go back and look it over before they put it on the screen. So yeah, I mean, we're going to keep kicking this movie a lot. I will try to be. I think we're all sort of trying to be generous. I'll be generous to say, like, it is very clear that he had these intentions for this to be this big, sweeping, impactful statement. But it doesn't work. And I think to go back to that question it's that none of the pieces come together, and that's both really on the craft side in addition to the sort of writing side. I mean, there are like these interesting little visual things. There's this like recurring, like when they're attempting, because a movie about like how the society may fall because no one's listening to the regular people. The only regular people we ever see are like evil, like racist mobs that are forming. But when they do actually sort of try to reference sympathetically the people, they're like silhouettes on the buildings of New York, the skyscrapers of New York. And that's really interesting, but it's also interesting in a way that's like reminding me about the bad choice it is to just focus on these big, powerful families when you're trying to condemn the big, powerful families for being too big and too powerful. So, yeah, it's just like deeply flawed on every level. And like, I see how it took him so long because he was trying to crack it, and unfortunately he never did. And it kind of just feels like he was like, well, if I don't do this now, I'm gonna die, and it will never happen. So let me just do it. And what we got was this thing that didn't work.
I will say that the one thing that the film does effectively convey is that Francis Ford Coppola has a lot weighing on his mind. You know what I mean? And like that in of itself, and maybe if I had to try to make sense of some of the positive reviews, I think people are picking up on that, where they're like, wow, this like master filmmaker with his last gasp of breath or whatever. I can't speak to Francis Ford Coppola's current health or anything like that, but you know, like he's towards the end of his career and he's trying to lay it out on the table, and you got to respect that, right? So I feel like that sense does come through. Because of that, it feels so, the storytelling feels so haphazard and so desperate, and has almost kind of like an attention deficit quality to it, right? Where it's like, oh, right, but also we expect our pop stars to be virginal, and also like the banks are owning everything and corrupt everything, and also like it just has so many, yeah, like Antonia said, like it has like 10 different thesis statements that it's trying to kind of cram in here. Two things that what everyone's saying makes I'm reminded of. One in this, again, in the spirit of generosity, I'm going to make myself vulnerable in the way that Francis Ford Coppola clearly has. When I was in college, I took a playwriting class, and one of my projects was, and I think it's very telling, I cannot remember what the plot of the play was that I wrote, but it basically was taking lyrics to Queen songs and giving them to different characters to yell at each other. That's what this movie is, with like famous quotes, you know, like, and there's an expectation of applause of like, see, I put Shakespeare in conversation with Marcus Aurelius, and like, you know, everyone's kind of referencing and quoting all these like philosophers, and isn't that, and it's almost like him doing that because this is what I think happened to me when I wrote this play, which no one liked. Just for to be clear, my whole class when I workshopped it, they were like, okay. But the thing that I was so exhilarating for me was that it allowed me to analyze, interpret, reflect upon the meaning of those lyrics in a way that I found very joyful. And that's what this movie feels like, that it's the process of writing it probably was very satisfying for Francis Ford Coppola, but the end product, it makes no sense to the rest of us, right? It has a lot of like, and this is the other thing I wanted to say in the short take, but I couldn't really explain it without spoilers, but it does feel like the Emperor has no clothes kind of situation, where it's like, and this again speaks to the reviews that I've seen that are like, you all just don't understand it. Like, this will be a masterpiece taught in film classes in 20 years, right? That very much like Caesar Catalina, who is, we are told over and over again, is a genius, and told over and over again that he is a visionary and talented. We walk away after like almost 2.5 hours of this movie with, or at least I did, with zero understanding as to why he is a genius and like what his vision for the future actually is. You know what I mean? And there's no there, right? It's talking about the concept of genius and the concept of the future in the abstract, but never offers any actual concrete ideas about what that would mean. Right?
Well,
And
Jen,
kind of
you didn't see the future. It's moving walkways.
is it really like lava lamp people movers? Like,
Every
that's what
place
it
is
is?
an airport, and you don't need to walk anymore. It's actually very similar to the vision of the future in Pixar's Up. Not Up, Wall-E, excuse me.
Yeah, no, I was
In
like,
Wall-E, where you know, it's like, we don't need to walk anymore. You can. It's okay if you have a cane. You can just zip, and that's it. That's the future.
but yeah, I don't know where else I was going with that. But that, yeah,
Sorry.
to me, it seems like the movie is presenting itself as being a lot more substantive as it is, and that might be it might be a byproduct of how abstracted it is and how allegorical it is. You know what I mean? That it forgot to think about what's underneath the allegory. I don't know.
No one
I was
knows,
trying
Jen.
to think of what I'm like, this feels like something where like an artist has too many influences and we just can't understand it. I couldn't realize what I was thinking about. And then I realized it's the play from Sing Sing, right? Like it's the play
Mhm.
within the film
Uh,
Sing Sing, except this is just one guy. Like these are all the things I'm interested in. And we get Shakespeare and pirates and all those silly things. But it is just like, yeah, it's that he couldn't say no to any of those impulses and had nobody to say let's thin this out a little bit. And I feverishly read each of your letterbox reviews when they appeared, and I forget who made this exact point, but it's like that ends up being like there's all these little subplots that appear and then they just disappear, and it's like an hour later you're like, wait, was there a pop star in this? Like, was there a giant model of the city at one point for some reason? Like, you just lose all of those. Was there a satellite that crashed down and destroyed half the island and didn't really like make a difference to the plot? Like, it's just crazy that all of that kind of makes it into the final cut. You're like, well, nobody wanted to edit this down. Nobody wanted to kind of fit this all
There's
together.
a moment, I think it's during the sort of circus sequence. There's a moment where some random person looks up and says, "Oh, hey, look at that." And then it cuts to something random. And then
Yep.
that's it.
It was Dustin Hoffman, and he did it like 3 times.
Oh,
He was
okay.
like, "Would you look at that?" But it was like always just like it just cut back to the thing you were already looking at.
Yeah.
So it's just like what does that mean? Like what's that supposed to be? And so to be like having a couple times tried to be generous, to be less than generous with Francis Ford Coppola and the decision making of this movie, all of those references to these big things throughout history, these big important things in sort of Western culture. So, the history of Rome and Shakespeare, and there's like one or two like Dickens references, Beckett. There's all these things that kind of get sprinkled in. It did come across to me like him being like, and this is also in that line. I'm also as important as that. This is another great work of art that's going to take its position in the line of all of this, somewhat emphasized by the end of the movie, where it's just like, and we've entered a new era where everything is good because now you're seeing Megalopolis, and they mean the actual place opening up, but it's framed in such a way with that weird like dividing of the screen to like emphasize that you are watching a movie screen and like this is going to change the world. And it's like, oh buddy, it's not. Like, it's really not, because this isn't very good.
Well, in the Q&A, which I do want to talk about, maybe that's rhetorical situation. I think that's where I put that. But anyway, in the Q&A, he does say my films are prescient. And my response in my head was, I don't think you get to call your own films prescient. I think someone else has to designate that, right? I think it's not prescient if you're saying it is, kind of thing. So, yeah.
That did help set up how they ended up with the fake AI generated quotes from critics for his old movies. He was like, people trash my old movies and now they're considered classics. Like, talk about that. And then people tried to find
And
those
poor
quotes,
intern wrote that down and then went to ChatGPT.
Yeah. And then they just like used ChatGPT instead of Google, and they were like, yep, I found all these quotes.
So before we continue, was there anything that you actually liked about this movie? Or what maybe the better way to frame that is, what to you in this film did have the most potential? With all the edits that we keep saying didn't happen, could there have been a good movie in here? I know those are 3 slightly different questions. Those are like 3 slightly different questions, but I wanted to give you as many options as possible so you could come up with an answer. Something positive to say.
My laughter, dear listeners, is because we all clearly were gesturing for the other two to take the what actually worked here question, and nobody would. So so a moment ago, you both reminded me Dustin Hoffman was in this movie. And like, I was so excited to see him again. Like, it's been a long time since I've seen Dustin Hoffman in a new movie. And I think it probably goes without saying, some of his performances are like my favorite movie roles of all time. And so it's like, it's so frustrating, the array of people who are here and we know are capable of good work and are just not doing that. And so I got 2 that I loved, and they surprised me as much as you. First, huge shout out for for getting Jason Schwartzman. How'd they get him in this movie written by his uncle? I don't know, but putting Jason Schwartzman on a drum set warmed my little 90s heart because I'm a big Phantom Planet fan from back in the day. I was like, that's it. Jason Schwartzman played the drums. That's worth my 3 hours right here on screen. But my real performance standout, and this surprised me and maybe speaks to the overwhelming quality of the rest of it. I kind of thought Shia LaBeouf was the best at his job, and there was like this way in which all of the social commentary didn't click for me, but the buffoonish, ridiculous, spoiled boy man child is a figure that is ripe for the parody and needs to not just be taken down still, but like every 5 years we got to take him down, right? And to remind our society that like this is a type of person that we shouldn't value and we shouldn't think of as worthwhile or meaningful. The way in which he became a Trump figure too literally was a problem, and like the clear, like 1 week ago they had a guy hold up a sign that said "Make New Rome Great Again" just to make sure we didn't miss the obvious point being made. Like that didn't work for me, but the actual performance, I thought he looked like he was just like ridiculous, and that was what that part needed. So I realized that like 2 hours in, and I'm like, what am I even doing here? I should have walked out of this theater if Shia LaBeouf is the best part of this. But I have to say, yeah. So that I'll give Shia LaBeouf his flowers for this. Maybe I'll see, what was his last one? Honey Boy, something.
He's supposed to be very good in that.
I haven't seen it,
Not
but
not as good in real life when he interacts with women, apparently, as is also true for Dustin Hoffman, which is why you haven't heard of him, seen him in a little while, unfortunately. So yeah, I will say, to add to the I'm very disappointed to report that a crappy person was someone I really liked in the movie. I actually thought John Voight was doing, like, he like got what was happening the most. Like, he was just sort of like, okay, like this is going to be crazy, and I'm just kind of going to do, like, I'm going to be a sleazeball. And there is, which I think later we're gonna I might circle around and talk about it again, but I've read Francis Ford Coppola say it, and he said it again in the Q&A. Just like, I intentionally chose to cast people who had been canceled so this movie wouldn't look woke, which is what a statement, and what a time to be alive to hear him say that. But there was something interesting about, you know, Shia LaBeouf, Dustin Hoffman, and John Voight, and people can add to that list if necessary, felt like who he was talking about with those IVI cast these people. And they're all really gross slime balls in the movie. Now, granted, everyone's kind of a gross slime ball because it's all about the gross slime ball, like, aristocracy of society. But like, it did almost feel like he's saying all these things to get people to like put their guard down. And then it's like, and of course I made Shia LaBeouf like this creepy jerk who's like awful to everybody, and I made John Voight this like slimy guy who's super selfish and greedy. But I did think John Voight did a good job of it. And also, yeah, this was a very pro nepo baby thing, because I did think Jason Schwartzman, with very little to do, always popped and was always like enjoyable in a movie where there were long stretches where I didn't enjoy anything. He always sort of had this like fiddle, like fuddy-duddy energy about like, oh, okay, where he's trying to like figure out what's going on. He's just this sort of functionary around the mayor, Giancarlo Esposito, who's Cicero, in case you were worried this wasn't leaning into the Roman stuff too much. So that was always funny. And I also thought another like successful performance for a completely undercooked character was Talia Shire, Jason Schwartzman's mom and Francis Ford Coppola's sister, playing Adam Driver's mom in the movie as like a like light pastiche on Livia Soprano, the narcissistic mom who just like it's never good enough for her. No one's ever happy. And then she finally shows up to give like the slightest bit of approval before disappearing like Mad Max into the crowd at the end of the picture. But like, given that she's only in like 3 scenes in a total of maybe like 4.5 minutes, she killed it. Every line was great. And so it's just like, wow, maybe this just should have been get Nick Cage in and just do Coppola family reunion, and just do that on the screen and keep it really small. Maybe it could have been good. Antonio, did you have anything good?
I pass.
I was just thinking, I'm like, if you don't have anything nice to say, that's what you're doing here. All right. So maybe it's time to try to figure out what this movie was trying to say. So we're gonna go. This is a relatively new segment called Thesis Please, in which we try to determine what the main argument of a film might be.
Thesis, please.
So I'm actually going to start because I want to go back to the Q&A, because the Q&A, while in the moment, was confusing. Because I was like, why, love to see Robert De Niro, love to see Spike Lee. Why are they here? Right. That was kind of my initial, but then by the end of the Q&A, when Robert De Niro went from being half asleep to then activated and very excited, right? Then it became clear to me, and then it became even clearer to me why the Q&A was at the beginning, which again I was confused by. I'm like, normally Q&As are after the movie, because don't you need the people to have seen the movie to be able to listen to people talk about it? But I think instead it was a grand attempt to convey to us why the movie was supposed to be good. And by that, I mean that it's supposed to be a political allegory that will help save us from our political strife. And PT just made a great face. He just cringed. But basically, what I kind of inferred was that Robert De Niro and Spike Lee talking about Trump and like getting on their soapbox and being like, we can't let, and then Francis Ford Coppola literally saying, in a month, we are about to elect our new emperor, right? It was very clear to me that this was the point of this was the marketing angle. Maybe it wasn't the intention at the beginning, but this was the marketing angle that they were going to take for the movie, that the political messaging of like, we can't give our society over to authoritarian dictators, right? That's what happened with the Roman Empire. That somehow is supposed to help people ignore all the other things that we just spent a bunch of time talking about, right? And that the core messaging of like, we really need to take a hard look at our own society, and kind of the degradation and the corruption and the sort of hypocrisy that has plagued us, and that is going to be our own doom. I think that's what the Q&A was hoping to sort of transmute into our interpretation and experience of the movie. I don't know. What does everybody think about that?
So the reason why I cringe was not because of what you said. I think that you were right and you're accurate in interpreting what he was doing. It was more, that was my reaction to Francis Ford Coppola trying to squeeze what he did in this movie into that box, which doesn't
Yes.
which doesn't fit. And I think this is sort of where I was when thinking about the thesis, which again, like this esteemed director, it's because I did half glance through a couple Wikipedia pages in order to formulate this. But when he started developing this, he was sort of like thinking about like, I want to do like a big epic, like, and I guess like Metropolis was one of the things of just sort of like city of the future. Like, what could that be like? And he fell into like apparently all men do, thinking about the Roman Empire. And he got into this idea about the story of Catalina and Cicero. And this is where I admit I don't know much about Roman history, but again, briefly looking at the Wikipedia pages, is that Catalina was sort of supposed to be the like, what if we helped all the people and like tried to like do good things for folks, and not have it be so much about like us hoarding money and eliminate debt and let people maybe thrive a little bit more and break down some of the systems. And then he tried to like enforce that with like a military coup, and it was like no. And Cicero won and was like, why don't we keep things the way they are? And that worked out great for like 15 more years. And then the Rome fell, the Republic fell, and became an empire. So like that's where he started, and I think that's what he was working on. And then in the last 10 years, probably, he was like, oh, we are maybe like, this isn't like we should try to do nice things for people now and have a character that's trying to help everybody and do something nice. And then some people don't want to change stuff because changing stuff is going to cost me money, and I don't want to do that. but now we actually have like the potential fall of democracy is imminent and may be coming soon. I need that to be the movie, is we're on the verge of losing democracy, which is like a third, the triangulation of the philosophical components. So what he ended up doing is like he wants to issue a warning about the possible fall of America while offering this path forward towards this more optimistic, utopian, inclusive future where he has this thing that, again, I think the people who like this movie grasp onto this, and he emphasized it in the Q&A where it's like a utopia isn't about having all the answers. It's about constantly asking the questions and it's like not settling for society as we have it, but trying to like improve it and change it and evolve it and get everybody to work together on this. And he's trying to get that out there and talk about it as at a time where we're at this tipping point where maybe we're going to fall like far away from letting everybody talk and into a dictatorship and into an empire. And not like just like the American empire, but like an actual like emperor in charge thing. But the problem is he mixed that in with like this message that he's trying to have of like, but we all can really work together. And so that's why I cast like John Voight, who doesn't agree with me because he loves Donald Trump. And I don't, I'm Francis Ford Coppola. I don't love Donald Trump. And then Robert De Niro was like, Donald Trump. And was just like, went off for like 5 minutes. Then it came back to Francis Ford Coppola. And he was like, yeah, I don't like Donald Trump. But like, it doesn't really work because like you can't really reconcile the original Roman story he's trying to pull with the actual like history, like situation we're in now, because like this, he never really figured out a way to get that third thing in of the Shia LaBeouf character being Donald Trump trying to like blow everything up. So he's just like, we blow it up, and then he just gets killed by his own mob at the end, and it's like, okay, and it's like that, like all of that is too much of a mess. So I feel like he had an idea, reality got in the way, and he tried to incorporate that, and that's why he has like too many, like even if it's just those like three things he's trying to juggle, he can't do that in the movie, and so that's why it all falls apart. But I do think that's the intent of the thesis.
I think that's really well said. And I think that actually I mean, it's explicitly said, some of this, right? Like in
Right.
the movie about, and I think that actually the part of the movie, if the movie had stayed disciplined and had followed through on this idea of like visionaries who are trying to invent a greater future, but requires like like a leap of faith versus like politicians who placate people and their sort of present needs. Like that came pretty early in the movie, and maybe if it had followed through on that, because that's an interesting idea. Um, but yeah, I think that the framing of the movie at the beginning, where Francis Ford Coppola was trying to sort of explain what we were about to watch and trying to contextualize all of this in terms of today while I was watching it, um, was very confusing because at the beginning when it was Cicero versus Caesar, I was like, which one's supposed to be Trumpy? But then Trump shows up, and then I was like, oh, what do I do? What's this? And again, I just sort of threw up my hands. But like that initial thing, I think that was the sort of spark of something that that I thought like, okay, this could be interesting. Greg, what do you think?
Pass. I didn't know that was an option before. So no, I'll really take it on. So I will disagree with Jen on principle, but also more specifically on, I do think that to me in the Q&A, I thought that was actually the moment it went off the rails, because the most of the anti-Trump rants, which hey, I'm here for, I'm there, but were in response to the question, where do you see the future of the film industry? And like all the ignored the poor moderator and kind of went off the rails. So I can't say I ascribe to the theory that that was Lionsgate's goal. Or maybe even Francis Ford Coppola's goal. And if I'm being completely honest and not that generous, I think it's because Francis Ford Coppola didn't get that deep on it. The moments in the Q&A that really stood out to me is twice he came back to this theme that he thought was revelatory of, you are all my human family. We are all cousins. I didn't just cast my actual family in this movie. I believe we're all family. Megalopolis, when you're here, you're family. And when he kept coming back to that theme, I think it hinted to me at how he views the thesis of this movie as just like the most simplistic, we can do better, right? No, there is another way. Like, we can, as a human family, choose a better system. And this is getting into a little bit into what I added to the rhetorical situation, but it seems to me to be a man at the end of his life, seeing how the great dreams of his generation have failed, and maybe trying one last desperate, hey, as the ship goes down, I got one more song to play on the Titanic, right? Like, what if it is just art that can save us all and help us out? And the one other piece of evidence, I did want to say, in this week's edition of I'm secretly making this podcast a book club, the Francis Ford Coppola biography that came out, I think last year, or maybe the year before, The Path to Paradise, is really well done and kind of reminds you that as messy as this movie is, it is 100% his brand and always has been. And it's a good reminder, of the failed dream of American zoetrope. And this isn't an American zoetrope picture, but the idea that, like, hey, what if we took the corporate and the money out of this and went and built a house and everybody can just be artists in this house? But also, I'm going to kind of embezzle all the money and do a lot of drugs and partying because it's the 70s and that's what we should be doing. And it like, to me, that's exactly this. It's like, it's exactly the problem with this, which is that the film wants the thesis to be the artists can save us without at all looking at the culpability of the artists in supporting the terrible systems that still keep us in our chains. And so if we can do better, this ain't it. This isn't yet there. Like, we haven't yet figured out that alternative model.
Well, and I think that's a great point. And I think to add to that, to the degree that Adam Driver's character is coded as an artist because he's an architect, and that's, craftsman, at least. I think that's artist adjacent. And I think it's clear.
Vision, right?
Yeah, it's clear that he is the stand-in for the director, for the creator, for the creative type. So, like, again, having just skimmed real quickly the Wikipedia pages on it, it's like if this did start as Catalina versus Cicero, having not looked at any of the older drafts, having not looked at it, like, that story is someone thinks we can have a better world. They try to fight the system wins, and they die. And the end of the movie would have to be Adam Driver's character dead and the system being like, and we're winning. But it seems like, and I think to what Greg's saying about, like, this is sort of like, this is my last, like, rallying cry, is just like, we can actually do this. I'm going to be the optimist at the end. Is he has Catalina win. But then the thing that's conflicting about it, well, I mean, I do think part of the problem is, again, because this is added that third the third wheel, the extra bit of triangulation, which is rising fascism of Shia LaBeouf, that, like, well, it's like, well, if we all just get together and talk, is you can't get together and talk with fascists, because what they want to do is talk their way into taking over and then wiping you out, because that's kind of the whole deal with, like, what fascists are aiming for. So that already is a problem, and still maybe too hippy dippy 60s optimists about, like, we can all just figure it out, man. It's like, well, maybe in this situation we can't. And so in the movie, they sort of deal with that by just having the faceless rabble turn on him and wipe him out, which is fine. And then it's just back to the warring families. And so we have the let's make a better life person win, and Adam Driver, he wins, and he has sort of like the final say at the end. But his character isn't just called Catalina, he's Caesar Catalina. So he is also named for the dictator. When they say, like, when he says in the Q&A ahead of time, we're about to elect an emperor, his main character and his stand-in is the emperor. Like, that's the guy. So it's like, I kept being like, isn't this going to be a bad thing? Like, is that going to be like, there was a part of me that was like, do we have another half hour in this movie where it's like, now we have to see that actually giving him all the controls and giving him Megalopolis is going to lead to, you know, a terrible dictatorship, and we should never have done that. But it's like, no, it's actually fine. Like, he was in the right all along. So it is just like fundamentally at even the most basic thematic concept, beyond all the other stuff he tries to cram into it, it's flawed at its core attempt at having a central argument.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how many theses are we up to now? I lost count. To me, in a lot of ways, this movie makes the most sense as an autobiography. If you know what I mean, because the one way in which the 10,000 theses makes or are unified in theory would be as all ideas that Francis Ford Coppola has had, right? Because just to add another string, I feel like there really is the choice to go with a futuristic Rome does feel like it's kind of commenting on like a moral and cultural decline. There's a whole section of the movie with the bidding war over like the pledge stuff, like because that's like could be its own thing altogether. You know what I mean? The idea that like of like billionaires donating money to pledge that another woman is going to remain chaste. And then the way that gets undone is with a deep faked sex tape. Like, like that's a whole, we haven't even mentioned any of that.
Part of the joy of this movie is watching it with you. But the first time I heard laughing during time where she was definitely not, I don't think was supposed to laugh, but it made me laugh too, was when, what's her name? Vesta? Vesta?
Mhm.
Was that the? Yes,
Vesta
Vesta, of
Sweetwater,
course.
I believe was her name.
Yes, Vesta the Virgin. She's wearing her ridiculous whatever, and she literally says like, "You can see right through me." Like the whole thing, right? Just these on the nose, whatever. And maybe I like that seems like maybe it was supposed to be funny. I don't know. But
Yeah, I can't tell.
I looked over at you confused, and then you were laughing, and I was like, all right, let's just give in. Yeah. Sorry, Jen, I was interrupting you.
No, it's fine. Oh, my original point, sorry. This is what this movie does to you. My original point was that this movie makes the most sense as kind of like almost like a memoir of the brain of Francis Ford Coppola, because to me, actually, it seemed like he was both Cicero and Caesar. And here's why. Because the visionary artist that nobody understands and everyone's trying to suppress, right? Studios keep, and like a lot of this came up in the Q&A, which is sort of why I thought of this, because he kept being like, yeah, studios never wanted me to let me make any of these movies, right? Like that was his kind of like ornery, like a context for this of like, you know, people didn't want me to make Apocalypse Now. People didn't want me to make The Godfather Part 2. I said no, unless it could be called Part 2. Like he had all this stuff where it was like him against the world kind of, right? And so I think that's the part of him that is the Caesar character. But then I think the sort of aging father and grandfather is the Cicero character. Because to me, all of the scenes between Cicero and Julia seem coded as like Francis Ford Coppola talking to his kids, right? And he even, and in the Q&A, he made some snide comment about like, all my kids want to be filmmakers. None of them want to be winemakers. So like I had to get rid of my wine company, right? So this idea of your children, you always think you have hopes and dreams for your children, but then they want to do something else. That's exactly what the storyline of the Julia character is, right? Her father wants her to follow in his footsteps, and she wants to go to the other side and join his enemy, right? So, and also we haven't mentioned that the two main characters of this movie, if you could call them that, are Julia and Caesar. Like Julius Caesar. Okay.
Oh, I
don't
just
know.
got it. Ah, there
Okay.
it is.
It was really subtle. So
Wait a
like
minute.
I was,
Are
I
all
wasn't
these
sure.
names related to Rome?
I know, right? But anyway, but a lot of those seemed very tender and sincere. Like the most authentic dialogue relatively in the screenplay for me was Cicero talking to Julia, where he was like, where she's begging him to trust her, and he's just like, I can't get over my old man ways. Like, go ahead, Greg.
Sorry, I really like that point you were making, and I think my point about zoetrope kind of fits neatly together with that, to make it. And then one aspect that I think complicates that and is just crazy is like we survive this long epic. We end on a like really cliche shot of a baby. Like there's hope for the baby, which is all he wants there to be. And then you like smash cut to the same kind of really ugly Roman Photoshop slides, and it says "For my wife Eleanor," and like I don't know, man. Like this is another example of like everything I've learned about that marriage is he was awful, right? He's sleeping with the playmates at the Apocalypse Now set while she's trying to balance the books and raise the kids and on and on and on and on. And yet, when you're talking about how tender the relationship between Caesar and Julia is, I want to be like, is that her? Is he saying like he only like could be the artist because she was there? But also like maybe I want to be more generous and be like, maybe she's the artist, right? Because, and this goes back to Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now, pretty good film. Masterpiece is the documentary about the making of Apocalypse Now, right? And like, so like, what if she's like the hidden talent and all this? And I thought at times they were portraying that Julia, I actually thought there might be a sneaky bit where Julia was the one actually manipulating the megalon. I don't know what I'm even saying at this point, but like she was the talent and he just thought it was him. Like she was like using her force powers in his presence and he thought it was him. None of that panned out and it went nowhere. And she kind of disappeared in this, but this kind of, I'm desperate for it to not just be the cliche, like that was my muse, and because that's Greek, not Roman. But I think it just can't quite congeal into something a little bit more. But I don't want to lose that piece that like he took a turn direct. Gave this dedicated it to his wife who recently died, as I recall, right? She's no longer with us. And so maybe that's part of his motivation. Maybe it's just one of many other regrets that he's trying to give a mea culpa to. There's I'll shut up. There's a really old Simpsons episode where Bart Simpson meets, I believe, an evangelist played by Billy D. Williams, and Billy D. Williams said, "You should live a life without sin." And Bart Simpson says, "No, I'm going to sin all I want and then do a last minute deathbed confessional." And the evangelist goes like, "Dang, that's a good angle." And I felt like this was the like, "Dang, that's a good angle" of movies because it's like I've lived a life full of all these excesses and terribleness, but at the last second, I'm going to try to say my bad and get absolved of all of them. So thesis, please. My bad.
I do think the Eleanor title card is just because she died. If she were still living, I don't think it would be dedicated to her. With all due respect, maybe it would have been like to my family or to my grandkids. Feel like that would be more in line with the end of the movie. But I mean, Eleanor is clearly Catherine Hunter, who gets on the moving walkway so fast ahead of her husband and then reaches back as if she's going to pull him like off balance and like knock him down, or should be like a mile ahead before he actually gets on it, which was one of the few like unintentionally humorous parts of the end sequence of the movie. Was again really celebrating an airport people mover as the vision of the future.
Where do we want to go from here? I feel like I'm looking ahead at rhetorical situation. We've covered most of the things that were listed there already, unintentionally, or I don't know.
I mean, we can get more into the performances, I guess, is probably just the better.
Well, you also had done it as like who's innocent and who's not innocent.
Yes.
And that's anyway,
I'll start with innocent. I'll start with innocent. I agree. John Voight, who was at our showing, who was at the LA
Whoa.
premiere, I guess, at the Chinese Theater. That John Voight understood the assignment. Catherine Hunter, I think, is always good in everything, and I think that with limited space here, she always makes interesting choices, and just always seems like smarter than whatever she's in, and like that was low bar here, but she was good. She was good. Um, and I actually think Giancarlo Esposito, even though he was saddled with some like clunker lines too, um, there was something about like his delivery and his character that I never like hated him in the way that other like we were supposed to hate him, I guess, because like I don't know, everyone hated him, but like I thought that he brought like a dignity to that character. Um, and especially as opposed to like Adam Driver, an actor I really like, but like every time he gave one of those long monologues, I would just sigh. So those were my three that I thought were innocent. Who should we add to that list?
I do want to make two little clarifications for your list. John Voight, guilty in life, but innocent in this
Of
movie.
course.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I will also note, as I did already say this to the people who saw it with me, but this is a good moment, following up on what you said, Antonio, to note my favorite exchange of dialogue during the movie, which was 2 hours and 15 minutes in, when Adam Driver stood atop some like strange archway and addressed, I guess, the entire city, and said, "What is time?" And in response, Antonio in the seat next to me said, "Ugh." And that I think was the best exchange in the whole movie. But yeah, I agree with what you are saying. Catherine Hunter clearly had a whole character in her mind, like, and like didn't try to squeeze it in, but you just felt like there was a full life happening there, which is she's very good at. And I do think Giancarlo Esposito always like never had a moment that a lot of the other actors had where it was like, what did you just say and why did you say that? Like where it almost looks like it would they filmed a rehearsal take and then that's what they used. Like that seemed to happen with a lot of other actors, and he never had that. He always seemed to have a purpose in what he was doing. I'm going to say justice for Aubrey Plaza, even though she is guilty in this movie. She's guilty and convicted and sentenced to many years. But I think that like it's not her fault. Like she was doing everything she was supposed to do. I think there was a weird like, and again, maybe this is because of the context of knowing about the like some of the stories. I did not read the biography, but I am vaguely aware of Francis Ford Coppola's history of like womanizing and being a famous man in the 70s and onward, and sort of having that male centric view of things. But there was a lot of this kind of like creeping around the edges of the movie, and it really all focused on Aubrey Plaza of just like, women, don't they ruin everything? Like, aren't they always like, they're not always the problem, but man, they're making it worse. And so like she really had to take on all of that. And I do think I'm seeing a lot of people be like, but Aubrey Plaza understood the assignment and Aubrey Plaza's doing it. It's just because she's the wackiest and craziest, but in a way that's not the Aubrey Plaza brand. So I really respected that and I appreciated it, but also just guilty, like very like, just like, oh my God. Like, and she's doing what she had to do, but like, it was very unfortunate. All
To
around.
me, her line readings always felt like she understood how ridiculous what she was supposed to say was, and that she just couldn't help herself but deliver it in a way that made it even worse. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
like, because I think if I were her, I would try to find some sense of fun in what I was supposed to be doing, and that to me it seemed like that's what she was trying to do, where she just tried to lean in, but it just like accentuated the writing in a way that was not great.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. For me, I
What
thought Adam Driver was working really hard, as he always does.
Yeah.
To what degree of success, I'm not sure, but at least I don't know he you know what I mean. Like he's never half-hearted in a role ever. Like he always commits to it, even if he doesn't want to.
Yeah, there were times when he which again was introduced and then dropped. There were times where it was like, and he has these like terrible flaws, like he has this like drug addiction, and and that's also when we're introduced to his like terrible mother, and like at that whole like I don't know Madison Square Garden pop star auction, what the hell, like circus for like chariot race, like the birthday party, everything was happening. But like he does a bunch of really weird things where like just like he's just giving a very like interestingly strange performance, and I was like, that's cool. I like that he can lose it, and like when he loses it, he starts to do these really eccentric Adam Driver things. And then like that I was like, maybe that will be contrasted with him just sitting there and brooding and like talking down to folks, especially women, whenever he's talking to someone else. But that never really came back. He always was just brooding from that point on, and looking tortured and feeling sad. So yeah, I mean, I do think he was doing. I'm with Jen in that I think he was doing the best that he can, but I'm also with Antonio that it like failed to the point where I was like, let's move on. Let's move on, Adam. Like I think let's wrap it up. We're done.
Have any of you seen Annette?
Yes. Oh man, I really thought of Annette a lot. I was,
Yeah, me too.
if you should definitely see it. You two who are saying no, it's wild, but that to me was the movie that I thought of the most because Adam Driver just commits, and it may not be what you want or what you expect, but he commits. And Sparks, the band, is innocent. Justice for Sparks. So
Also
go ahead,
the
Jen.
baby puppet. The baby puppet also innocent.
Yeah. I want to
I will
catch
see
up on like just a couple things that were sprinkled throughout. One, as a Star Wars fan, Moff Gideon, Edie Karn, and Kylo Ren sitting and playing poker. I'm there for that. That's a good like crazy. It speaks more to how much Star Wars has been created in the last 10 years than anything else. Two, Antonio is right about Catherine Hunter. People should see the terrible movie out right now where she plays Brandy's evil mother-in-law. She is phenomenal and
that's
commits to
right.
that in a way you will not believe. It's really, really fun if you like Catherine Hunter. Three, Aubrey Plaza was playing Janet Snakehole, her alter ego from Parks and Recreation. So this was the Janet Snakehole, the movie. And like, so it was just right down the line. Maybe this shows how bored I was. There was a very funny sex scene early in the movie where Aubrey Plaza and Adam Driver are having sex, and you see them having sex. She's fully clothed, and then they cut away to him, and they cut back to her, and she's putting her dress back on. And I was like, wait, her dress wasn't off. Again, that quality of like, did they shoot the rehearsal? And it made me laugh because in my head, I came up with the meta narrative that like she was willing to like shoot the nude scenes, but then was like, no, I'm not giving you that. Like, you don't deserve that Francis Ford Coppola movie. Like, I'll save my intimate appearance for a high quality film that I can win an award at or some such. So all those winners you just mentioned were there. I'm gonna instead for my pick go with not a justice for or to jail with, but just a huh. And so my huh is Lawrence Fishburne, who like why you sign up for this if you're Lawrence Fishburne? I mean, I know there's been a lot of kind of meta narrative about him not doing the Matrix reboot versus appearing in John Wick and how, there's kind of a lot going on. But like so much of this film's like even pretensions of grandeur and gravity come from his voiceover. And like it's the Morgan Freeman style voiceover, but Lawrence Fishburne has that deeper kind of commanding voice, I would say, that strength. And then when he's on screen, it's an entirely thankless role, including a really weird movie where he almost like it. I think I'm correct in remembering it goes from voiceover and then he finishes the sentence out loud, essentially looking down the barrel of the camera. And so I was thinking of like Hudsucker Proxy, like, oh, is that what we're doing here? Like some kind of like we can, like, and then it was like it never happened again, and he's just around. And I know he's in Apocalypse Now, I believe. So it's just maybe a long-term Coppola, but like I don't know. It was baffling to me. It's a huh.
Yeah, maybe we need to do what is everyone else's biggest ha moment. I don't know if this is my biggest, but one thing we haven't mentioned is the revised edition of the Pledge of Allegiance that the
Sure.
movie basically ends with. This movie had lost me way. Oh wait, I had an even better question. So that I forgot that I didn't put in the outline. What was the exact moment that this movie lost you? Where you knew for sure what we were in for?
And my revision of that is I do feel like it was a series of dominoes falling where it was like, oh, this won't be good. Oh, this isn't like, this is actually bad. To like, oh no, none of this makes any sense. I will just start with I was like oh no, this movie lost me when Adam Driver started doing To Be or Not to Be and kept doing To Be or Not to Be and just gave like a 2-minute reading of To Be or Not to Be in a situation where he's standing on scaffolding with his enemies over a model of the city that doesn't need to exist, that isn't explained, and there's no reason why he's giving that speech beyond wouldn't it be cool to watch Adam Driver do the To Be or Not to Be speech, which again was pretty cool. I left the movie thinking I wish I could see Adam Driver play Hamlet or based on his appearance later in the movie, The Phantom of the Opera. But I don't like that was when like the little bit of like, wait a minute, like I had kind of gotten on board. I don't know if Antonio could feel the energy, but I kind of gotten on board with Francis Ford Coppola being like, we're on the verge of losing a democracy. Like, this is a message of hope. And I was like, that's great. Like, I was on board. Like, we need that. Let's go. And the opening of the movie is that trailer, which looks really good. It was like, okay, what does it mean? Let's see what it means. And it starts setting up all the pieces. And it's like, okay, maybe it's still good. It's still good. And then he does To Be or Not to Be. And I was like, Jesus Christ. All right. I'm out. I'm already turning it down. I'm turning down to no thank you.
That was
Me,
actually
probably a little earlier. Oh yeah. For me, maybe like the first on the nose monologue. I can't even remember whatever it was. Whenever it was just like talking in abstraction, and then that was solidified by the very like first or second of the what we're calling the sort of like PowerPoint looking like framing devices where they just have like pretentious text on the screen. Because at that point, it's like I don't know. As soon as I saw it, I was like, "Is this a movie or is this a parody of a movie?" Right? Like, I don't even know how to make fun of it as a parody because, like, it's just already that, right? So, yeah, pretty early. How about you, Greg? How about you, Greg? Assuming it is you, Greg.
Let's see. I think the shot of the baby. No, it was earlier than that.
Can
You
we have
know,
PT? Can we quickly just have PT recreate what he said under his breath in that scene?
Oh, it was that because so for those of you who are still listening and haven't seen the movie or have seen the movie and have understandably blotted it out of your memory, at the very end of the movie, the last shot or sequence at least is the Julia's parents, Giancarlo Esposito and Catherine Hunter, the Cicero family, with Adam Driver and Julia's. Clearly, I don't care about their character names. Showing their baby, handing their baby to them, and Giancarlo Esposito says something about sort of like basically this is the future, and then like leans down, and it's like shot from underneath, like through like a glass floor, and then puts the baby down on this very tiny baby-sized carpet, and I wanted that to be a magic carpet that flew away. I wanted that to be the end of the movie, was just the carpet like just revved up and then
the end of
took
Grease,
off.
but a baby on a carpet. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
but a baby going off into the distance, waving.
Continue. Unpause time. Continue, Greg.
So I don't remember exactly when it lost me, but I will say I tried because like I've said on this podcast before, I like a big swing, and I say if you get your shot and you get your budget, like take the big swing. But the moment I think I knew it was really done for me, even if it wasn't the first kind of warning sign, the scene on the God, it's so hard to recreate these moments. They're standing on the giant clock, and then there are steel girders, and Adam Driver is out on one girder, and Nathalie Emmanuel comes out on the girder. Bracketed parenthesis comment, what was up with her accent? She had it once every 5 lines. It was atrocious. But that was one of the visuals that had been in the slideshow beforehand. And I like, when I saw how hard that moment failed, that was when I was like, so this movie has nothing. Because the way that was like imaginative and made me think about the future and the possibilities and the time freezing, like, and all of that. And none of that was present. They seem to be on the top of the world's tallest skyscraper with these girders suspended from heaven. I don't know. And like they're walking around, and the whole point is that time is not stopped, but like the girders on the cables do not swing or react to their movement, and there's no wind up here. And like it was like whatever I thought could still be like the fantasy of a great architect, it was just like there's nothing left in here. So that was my like, okay, I'm done here. I'm gonna watch the crowd react. And the gesture I saw in the crowd the most was like arms raised to heaven, like, what? Like, how? What is this happening? And sitting in front of the Boston film critic pool that was like angry from the beginning that this wasn't a daytime screening was like they were gone pretty quick. So I just enjoyed the show of watching the crowd.
So I just realized there's one element of this that pretty notable that we have not discussed, and that is the live performer that comes out on stage. I'm going to put it out to the rest of you. Why did this movie have that?
Well, it's because when the satellite crashes, it breaks the fourth wall.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know if that's really what it is. When Antonio was talking about, I think Antonio, maybe Greg, was talking about the satellite, like what the hell's going on to the satellite. That is when I was like, oh, maybe that's what happened. Because that, it's the satellite crash that leads to suddenly the lights come up and there's a person standing there, which the effect of which was somewhat mitigated in our screening, because the person who did it walked out with a flashlight, like in a like the stage area in front of the IMAX screen that's a notable distance ahead of the final row. So it was just a lot of movement and light happening underneath the screen for like a minute before this was going to happen. So it was like, oh, I guess now it's the time when someone's coming out. But yeah, it was very disappointing because everyone had like talked about that as like this crazy thing. That there was a quote unquote whole scene where someone interacts from the crowd, but it's really just one line. That I think at our screening, the person actually read it. I have heard that at some of these screenings, it is Jason Schwartzman's voice and the actor just lip syncs to what Jason Schwartzman says.
That's what it sounded like to me.
Well, maybe that was, I thought it was actually. So I guess the answer to the question of what do they do without the actor is it's just an off-screen Jason Schwartzman asking Adam Driver a question at a press conference.
Oh, with nothing on the stage?
At all those screenings that are going to happen of Megalopolis for weeks and weeks and weeks as it rampages through the box office.
I think that's exactly what it was at mine. I think it was some of the film critics found the PR reps outside, and I was hustling to the bathroom because it was a very long movie, but I was walking by and somebody asked them like, oh, so you're the one who performed, and are you a trained actor? Like, how did you get this gig? Like, and the guy was like, oh, I just work for Lionsgate. And so I was told to go stand at the microphone. And like in our theater, the full house lights came up and it was just a guy standing there for the one line that I thought was very clearly from the screen in my theater. And so, yeah, I concluded the same thing. It's like, oh, this is actually edited so that you don't have to have the actor in here at all. I'm not sure if it was Jason Schwartzman's voice. I didn't clock that, and I'm pretty good at clocking his voice because I'm a Wes Anderson fan. But it was just a voice that could easily just have been not a person there live. The fact that there was a slide that warned us that would happen cracks me up. That like they were so worried we'd see that person moving and think it was something happening and like flee in panic. For like by the time he said his one line, like you couldn't even react. It was already over, and the house lights went back down, and we carried on. So it got more laughs than anything in my theater.
So, friend of the show, Hasib, managed to somehow shield himself from any kind of spoilers about this. So he didn't know it was coming. And what he had told me in a DM was that he was so surprised when the lights turned on in the theater during the live scene that I almost yelled out, "Turn the lights down. I'm trying to watch a movie here," in the purest New York accent. So glad I didn't. And actually, for a split second, when the lights kind of came up in our theater, I had the same thing where I was like, "Did the projector break? Is something happening?" And then I'm like, "Oh, this is the thing. This is the thing that we've heard about is happening." And it was, for me, it was like so anticlimactic. Like I didn't, and because I listened to too many podcasts, and so it had been talked about by so many people in podcasts I'd listened to that I had hyped it up as like this huge monumental crazy thing, and it's really just one line that's like not particularly important spoken, and I'm like, this really just feels like for the sake of being different, like style over substance kind of choice, and doesn't actually add anything to the story.
I mean, I guess it got people talking, like
right,
like it got people being like, "There's an interactive part of this movie. Like that's weird. What would that be like?" But yeah, the fact it wasn't even like an exchange. Like I thought it would at least be like A B, where it would, it would seem like, ooh, this performer has to time it like to respond to what's happening on the screen, which doesn't seem that like revolutionary. I feel like that's something that would have happened potentially 100 years ago.
Think of the Jurassic Park scene, right? It's a parody of how theme parks have that in 1993.
Right.
And then this was not even as complicated as their joke version of that. Yeah, bizarre.
I do feel like there's a lot in this movie that gives the impression it thinks it is being Eisensteinian, right? That it's like that kind of high level abstracted montage, but then also at the same time like Citizen Kane, where because it does have that kind of like epic old Hollywood feel. The soundtrack in particular implies that it thinks of itself that way, and especially the scenes between Caesar and Julia do feel like they think that it's like the most epic Hollywood romance ever, and it's just not. Like, I think a good place to end on, because we're not going to do an Oscars watch, because there's no way this is getting any Oscar nominations.
No, I have one. I have one.
Wait, what? Are you serious?
Yes, I do. I think there's a chance.
So I have to play the music?
I will sing the music if you don't play it.
Right,
you know I will.
I do. I do know that.
We are all for you. Thank you. I want to put people on screen.
We were so close.
In the spirit of this movie. I was going to say, in the spirit of this movie, I'll let the music play in full.
Okay. I was going to say we were so close
when it's useful
to getting to where we have Greg just redoing all of these sound drops. So we just have
you
Greg's
wanted
voice.
that. Okay.
I think all
right, Greg, what is it? What's your grand Oscar theory for
exactly one Oscar nomination for this movie, and I think you all have to give it a shot. Costumes. I think the costumes are actually really kind of maybe the only effective futuristic Roman inspired. There are a lot of capelets. There are a lot of nice, kind of gowns for a lot of the actresses. So I look, it like not a full production design, not any acting. Like I'm there. Absolutely no for director. It would have been great, but nope. But I'm going to say I will accept it getting a nomination for costumes. And also I wanted an Oscar death race to make all the weirdos like me suffer.
Okay. I here's what I want to say is the person on IMDb under costumes is Milena Canonero. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I apologize. Already a 4-time Oscar winner. Gotta go back here. Starting in 1976 for Barry Lyndon. Chariots of Fire in 1982, Marie Antoinette in 2007, and the Grand Budapest Hotel in 2015. However, she is listed as uncredited.
This is not helping PT.
Greg think she asked to have her name taken off this movie, and so no one is credited as being the costume designer. I don't know if like Alan Smithy is going to get nominated for costumes for Megalopolis.
Wait, but then how did you know who it was?
Because it's on IMDb, parentheses, uncredited.
Oh.
So maybe there is a costume designer who's credited that just hasn't been updated on IMDb. Like people are not poring over the Megalopolis credits to update things, and maybe she was hired at one point, but then isn't actually on it. But as of right now, I'm gonna say I'm not saying Greg can't make the motion he's making, but it does feel like she's asked to have her name taken off of this. She saw the movie and was like, "No, thank you. I don't want to be associated with this."
So costume is one of those categories, much more so with hair and makeup, I think, but is one of those categories where obscure movies that did not do well can get nominated. So, but I feel like this would be the exception to that.
I mean, I have a strong doubt that Marie Antoinette got many more Oscar nominations than costume design, but was a winner. Like that was a movie that was not well received. Time has been better for it. Yes, that was its only nomination, was in costume design, and it won. So that would be the precedent. Although again, that woman is uncredited in the movie itself. So who knows? Again, is that an IMDb quirk? No one's listed on Wikipedia either. So there's no name attached to costumes currently.
Yeah. Someone do some investigative journalism on this.
I was going to say, if Dune is still our leader in a lot of these technical categories, then, it doesn't have amazing costumes. But then I remembered Florence Pugh, and Florence Pugh has a few good looks for that film, as opposed to just a whole bunch of grayish still suits. So, it's a long shot. I'm not even saying I want it to be there, but I think if it has any prayer, that's the category.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I didn't even include Oscar Watch on our outline. That's how how confident I was. Does this is my last question, and then we'll put us out of our misery. Does this film and sort of its reception, the fact that it exists, is it going to have any impact on the industry? Or is this just a really quirky, weird one-off thing that no one will remember?
I think if it has an impact on the wider industry, it's not its own impact. It is an accumulation of these old master directors putting out these like big sprawling epic movies that are like not successful. Again, I'm saying this under the assumption Megalopolis will not take off at the box office. Even the kind of people who would be like, I've heard this is a car crash, I'm gonna go, are not enough to make this make like $50 million. I would assume. But
it is currently projected at 5 to 7 million. The budget, I believe, was 100 million.
I will also note in the Q&A when Francis Ford Coppola explained, very proudly, understandably, his sort of machinations with the wine and merging it and taking 25% of this, conglomerate of wine empires with different families. I had always heard, and then he sold it, and that's how he got the money for this. He said that he took out loans against it, which, I mean, he's leveraging it, and so he could theoretically take it, but like he still has that. He still has all this like resource. He just borrowed money against it. So it's good to be rich, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's really the theme of the movie and also the production of the movie. It's very good to be rich. But yeah, anyway, I think this won't, assuming this won't be successful, this is going to be in that like, Fableman's Killers of a Flower Moon sort of run of these great masters where the movies came out. The first two were critically acclaimed, but they were not particularly like successful. And maybe add in West Side Story for Spielberg, which didn't make a lot of money, didn't take off at the box office. So like maybe it will be the like, are we sure these like great masters of the 70s and 80s and you can put them both through into the 90s, that like, are we sure that they're worth the investment? Are we sure they're going to get us the prestige that we want? When Netflix talks about we're not going to invest in these $100 million movies, they're staring right at The Irishman and they're looking right at Martin Scorsese being like, we're not going to do this anymore. So this is only going to exacerbate that of like, this would not have been a good investment if you invested in it. But beyond that, this feels very, unique.
Exceptional.
Yeah. Antonio, what's the Latin phrase? You're a lawyer. Sui genre. Is that how you pronounce it? How do you
Yeah.
Generis.
Sui generis. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm adding a French thing that shouldn't be happening. Sui generis.
I think it's a cautionary tale. More than anything.
Right. I mean, this combined with Kevin Costner with American Horizon, because he also at least partially self-funded that project, right?
Yes.
And that's definitely dead in the water right now. All right. I think we've done enough here. Antonio, where can folks find you? And I know there's only one place.
They can find me on Letterboxd at Aelefano, Aelefano. Greg, where can they find you?
Seeing Megalopolis 3 more times. But then when I finish that, I will be posting about it on Letterboxd at Eyeoncanon, EYEONCANON. PT, are you findable or have you stopped time?
I did stop time, but unfortunately only the magic carpet baby is moving. So I will say you can find me on Letterboxd. My account is at PT McNiff, PTMCNIFF. You can also find the show there at LTR Pod. You can follow the show on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. You can email us, thelongtakereview@gmail.com. And you can also subscribe for more episodes. Leave a rating, leave a review. Wherever you're listening right now, why don't you just go ahead and do that? Jen, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI. And you can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen.
I do feel like we need to know, and I obviously feel one way about the first movie, but it is notable that the top 2 draft picks of our hype draft both had moments very early on when a title card appeared, and Antonio was like, "I'm done. Like, I'm out. I'm already. This is already a mistake."
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Thanks, everybody. We must have a great debate about our future. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.